Sheikh Abdullah, who was somebody very close to the Indian National Congress, because they were on his side against the Maharaja, because they were against Maharajas. कहना कि हमारे टाइम में हमारे way we grew up, Sheikh Abdullah was the hero and the Maharaja was the villain. There was no doubt in our minds.
उजाले अपनी यादों के हमारे साथ रहने दो।
कश्मीर लाइफ के यादें प्रोग्राम में आपका खुशामदीद। जैसा कि आप जानते हैं, ये प्रोग्राम पर्सनल हिस्ट्री प्रोजेक्ट है, जिसमें हम उन मर्द ख़वातीन से बात करते हैं जिनके तजुर्बे इस सोसाइटी के लिए बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट हैं और जिनका कंट्रीब्यूशन हिस्ट्री, हमारी कलेक्टिव हिस्ट्री का एक हिस्सा है। पर्सनल हिस्ट्री एक हिस्ट्री का निस्बतन नया जॉनर है जो पॉपुलर हिस्ट्री से शायद कभी मुताबिकत भी ना रखता हो, लेकिन हिस्ट्री को स्ट्रांग बनाने में उसका ज़्यादा रोल हिस्ट्री में रहा है। रिसेंट हिस्ट्रीज़ में ऐसा कुछ कहा जा रहा है। तो आज की इस कड़ी में हमने तकलीफ दे दी प्रोफेसर नीरजा मत्तू को, जो अंग्रेजी तो पढ़ाती हैं लेकिन महज पढ़ाती ही नहीं थी, सिखाती भी थी, लिखती भी हैं। आजकल थोड़ा कुछ टाइम से लिखना तो छोड़ नहीं दिया है, पढ़ना छोड़ तो नहीं दिया, लेकिन उसमें रफ्तार थोड़ी सी कम हो गई है। मैम, आपका खुशामदीद कश्मीर लाइफ के यादें प्रोग्राम में।
मुझे बुलाने का बहुत शुक्रिया। बहुत खुशी हो रही है कि आपको इंटरेस्ट है पुराने लोगों से बात करने का।
हिस्ट्री में कोई पुराना नहीं होता। हर शख्स का कंट्रीब्यूशन जो होता है वो हर दौर में निहायत ही इम्पोर्टेंट रहता है। और आपने जो काम किया है और आपने जिन हालात में पढ़ाई की है, डिस्पाइट बीइंग फ्रॉम अ प्रिविलेज्ड बैकग्राउंड गिवन द डेज यू आर बॉर्न, कंट्रीब्यूशन बहुत इमेंस है। आपने 5 से ज़्यादा किताबें लिखी हैं।
5-6 लिखी होंगी जी हाँ।
तो
एक कॉफी टेबल किताब भी थी, वो बेचारी उस वक्त अनफॉर्चुनेटली इट केम आउट इन
1989
just on the verge of militancy, so the book poor thing died.
अच्छा।
It was called the Trefoil Land, Kashmir, Jammu and Ladakh. But anyway, that's old history now.
But that still is a contribution.
Yes, it was a beautiful book though.
तो हम शुरुआत में हम इस बात से करेंगे। मैं चाहूँगा, आप 1938 में पैदा होगी, ये ज़रूरी नहीं होता कि मुमकिन भी नहीं है कि बच्चा पैदा हो और उसे पता हो कि मैं किस माहौल में पैदा हुआ, लेकिन 5, 6, 7 साल तो लग ही जाते हैं। तो आपकी जो पहली यादाश्त है इस दुनिया के बारे में, क्योंकि आपकी दुनिया वही थी जो आपके आसपास थी,
वही थी।
क्या यादें हैं?
मुझे याद है अपना घर, और वो मुझे बड़ा खूबसूरत लगता था। मैं उस ज़माने में भी बड़ी खुश थी कि हमारा जो घर था उसमें एक बाग था, और बाग में कुछ फ्रूट ट्रीज थी, तो स्प्रिंग में ब्लॉसम आता था। मुझे याद है कि एक झूला था जिस पर मैं बैठती थी और फूल गिरते थे तो बहुत अच्छा लगता था। और मेरी दादी उस वक़्त ज़िंदा थी, वो पुराने कश्मीरी पंडित लेडी थी, who had come from the area of Safakadal to this new area on Exchange Road. ये एक्सचेंज रोड का जो घर था, ये भी एक उस ज़माने के लिए एक बहुत रेडिकल चीज़ थी, क्योंकि मेरे फादर थे असल में सफ़ाकदल के। He was born in Safakadal, but he had been educated and he had great modern ideas at that time, which prompted him to leave Safakadal and build a house in the civil lines of Srinagar. It was a place which we today, if you see the BSNL buildings on opposite to Pratap Park, you remember?
Yes.
And on the other side, you remember Women's College?
Yes.
Between exactly. Women's College and BSNL was a little enclave built by Kashmiri Pandits, 5 families. They were all, you see, had been educated in the modern way, and they were all aspiring towards modernization, towards you see, a better way of life. So they built these bungalows in the English style, and they had sanitary fittings in those houses in 1938. and there was no drain flowing trashy water outside. It was clean, and they were like-minded people. They were all self-made people. They were not jagirdars, no landlords. They all maybe had some small land holdings, but they all were aspiring towards education and a modern way of life. And one thing common to all these officials, some professors, some revenue officers, some engineers, one doctor, one thing common was that they all believed in modern education. Not only were they educated themselves, but they educated their children also. So I was the youngest of my 5 brothers and sisters. So as the youngest, I was left to my own devices. My eldest brother was 15 years older than me. Number 2 brother was 13 years older. Sister was 11 years older. The next sister was 3 years older. So I was like a little wave wandering around, nobody taking much notice of what I was up to. But I used to be contented as a child. I don't remember anything which is unpleasant or anything, because as I told you, as the youngest I was a bit spoiled also, and I was allowed to do my own things. And the one thing I don't remember when I learned to read and write. Writing तो याद नहीं है, मगर ये मुझे याद नहीं मैंने कब पढ़ना सीखा, अंग्रेज़ी और हिंदी. तो मेरा एक ही occupation होती थी from the age of 5 or 6, which I remember, was to read whatever was available. And my father had a nice library. अब उतनी बड़ी किताबें तो उस वक्त नहीं पढ़ती होंगी, but there was something or the other available which fascinated me. Fairy tales थी, बहुत सारी चीज़ें. And my father was, as I told you, was an exceptional person. He didn't discipline his children. He was like a friend. जो कुछ एक्टिविटी उनकी होती थी उसमें सब पार्टिसिपेट करते थे. और देखिए कितनी जनरेशन थी. मेरी दादी थी उस वक्त, वो बिल्कुल ट्रेडिशनल कश्मीरी पंडित जैसे मैंने कहा, वो सही फिरन तरंगा वो करके, और उनका जो दिन का शेड्यूल था, दैट वाज फिक्स्ड. इट वाज अ डिसिप्लिन लाइफ शी वाज लीडिंग. कि सुबह सवेरे पूजा कमरे में पूजा करनी, सारे अपने उनको आइडल्स जो थे उनको धुलाना नहलाना, और फिर अपने चैंटिंग मंत्र करना, फिर नीचे आना, और दिन को वो कुछ काम नहीं करती थी घर का. 2 बहुएं थी उनके पास और नौकर भी थे 1-2, तो वो मगर अपना दिन को चरखा चलाती थी. एंड शी यूज्ड टू स्पिन पश्मीना. And I remember as a child sitting by her side while she was spinning, and I would help her to pick up some little cotton wool balls. They were not cotton, pashmina wool balls. Hand them over to her, and she would put them on the spin, and a lovely pashmina yarn would be spun. And then I remember also that she used to then call a weaver and give him all the yarn which was fashioned in the form of skeins, to weave into cloth. और उस क्लॉथ से मेरे फादर और मेरे अंकल, उनके एक ही भाई थे अंकल, उनके लिए एक फिरन बनता था. एंड विंटर में एवरी ईयर माय फादर्स बर्थडे यूज्ड टू बी इन December. He would have a new फिरन which was all spun by his mother. And these were her activities fascinated me. तो मैं उनके साथ ही ज़्यादातर बैठती थी. कभी वो कहती थी ज़रा हाथ पकड़ो, मुझे ये बनाना है अपनी पूछ. तो अच्छी खबर बटने आज ना पूछ लगा हुआ. So पूछ, that was a very complicated affair. It had to be starched, then it had to be twisted so that you had 2 tails at the end like a snake, and a hood on top like a cobra's head. This head. Exactly. All that she needed assistance of somebody to hold the ends of that cloth while she would twist them. So I would be sitting there because I had no other occupation. I was not sent to school. But then there was a home tutor who came for my 2 other sisters. So when was the age when home tutor started visiting you? The tutor? The tutor was basically there for my sister and my cousin, who were about 3-4 years older than me. And I used to hang around. I don't know whether I told you the only thing I learned was to read and write a little. Figures I had no idea about. Calculation, nothing. I didn't know what it was all about. And I was actually, nobody bothered me also. They didn't take much notice of the fact that I was not learning anything from Master Ji. But Master Ji also didn't pay much attention. तो लेकिन फिर क्या हुआ कि उसके बाद मेरे फादर की ट्रांसफ़र हो गई जम्मू.
अच्छा.
It was in 1950, when I was less than 12 years old. And up to 12 years old, this age, I had not gone to school. Nobody had paid much attention to what I was doing, because they took it for granted that since the Master Ji is there, she must also be learning something. So, but then when we went to Jammu, I went with my father, because my older sister was preparing for her matriculation privately, so she was left in Srinagar. So I went with my father and mother to Jammu. And there my father didn't know what to do, because he didn't know anyone. Where would he find a tutor? So he told me, come with me, let's see what we can do about your studies. He took me to the school, which was very close to where we lived. It was called, I think, Government Girls High School, Kachi Chhavni, Jammu. Kachi Chhavni, Jammu. So for the first time in my life, I saw a school. But then he took me straight to the principal's, headmistress's office. He introduced himself and told her that this is my daughter. She has not gone to school. You can test her and put her in any class which you think is suitable. So those days, you must remember that they used to introduce English in class 6.
Yes.
Till then, no English. So they thought, looking at my age, you must have seen my date of birth, they thought the best thing to do was to test me whether I knew any English. That was very lucky for me, because that is the only thing I knew. They asked me to write a few lines about myself, and that I was able to do, so they were quite impressed. They said, put her in class 9.
Class 9?
Class 9. It will sound ridiculous to you.
So it is very interesting that you never went to school and still you started your formal studies from class 9.
Because now for the first time I'm faced with mathematics, history, geography and other subjects apart from English. So this maths I had absolutely no idea. And the Master Ji at home had also paid no attention at all. Only thing I probably knew was to count up to 100. Nothing else. So, but anyway, and nobody knew about this disability of mine. My father also was not aware of it. So anyway, this for 3 months, I think I was admitted in school in November 1950. Then in 51 March, they had a annual examination, promotion from 9th to 10th. And then for the first time, it became evident that I couldn't proceed with my studies at all, because I was 0 in maths. I had scored 19 marks out of 200. But I had done well in other subjects. They thought something had happened to me, so they just put on my report, promoted to class 10. And fortunately, about the same time, my father was transferred back to Srinagar. But when he saw this report card, for the first time he realized that he had been a bit neglectful.
Yes.
They had neglected this part of my education. But once he came back to Srinagar, now that I had this certificate, promoted to class 10, this Kotibag school had been opened in the premises of this women's college. It was next door to where we lived. So with this thing, my father took me to the school, and the headmistress, I remember, was Mrs. Qureshi. Very sweet lady. She is the eldest sister of Mahmouda Ahmad Ali Shah. And her other sister was Begum Jalaluddin. She didn't really pay much attention to the marks card, but she thought that promoted to 10th is good enough. So there I was. But then my father started thinking that if I have to go for formal education, if I have to proceed, then something would have to be done. In those days, there used to be a choice for girls. You could either do full mathematics with algebra, geometry, trigonometry, whatever, or what was the choice option for girls was domestic arithmetic and household account.
Yes.
Which meant you had to do, one paper was pure arithmetic and one paper was like what is the use of making a budget, how do you keep a Dhobi's account and all the rest of it. More theory. So then he looked for a proper teacher and he found one. That was like a miracle. He found somebody who was only a matriculate, but he had the reputation of being very good at maths. So when he saw how bad I was, he realized that something drastic would have to be done. So he said that I will not come every day. I'll come only twice a week, And the other days you have to struggle with whatever exercises I give you. But first he had to remove the cobwebs from my mind because I had no idea of numbers. So he did something which is remarkable for those days. I'm talking about 1951. And he said he would set me problems. जैसे आजकल करते हैं ना बच्चों को प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग मैथ. उस ज़माने में उसके ये इंजीनियस आइडिया था. वो जाते जाते मुझे कहते थे suppose I went to the market yesterday. I don't know how much money I had, but I spent half of what I had on fruit. Then whatever was left, another half I spent on medicines, another half. Now tell me how much money did I have in the beginning? No, at the end I had 2 rupees in my pocket. Now can you tell me how much I must have had when I left the house? For the first time I realized that it was possible to think backwards. From the end to come to the first thing. He was left with 2 rupees, but 2 was half of what he had spent on this thing. So this is the way I was able to calculate. For the first time I realized what numbers meant. And he said, this is the kind of exercise you need to clear your head. And then every day he would leave with this kind of a puzzle. Work it out when I come next to my time. You should have the result before me. So I must tell you, he worked a miracle because he removed all the cobwebs, all the dust and whatever was there in my mind and brought out some possibilities in me. The result was that I did very well in my matriculation. I think my position was 12th in. It used to be an examination conducted by the University of Jammu and Kashmir. It was one university.
Yes.
My position was number 12 in the merit list. Entirely thanks to Master Premnath.
जैम कैश व्हीकल्स एक सायादार दरख्त की तरह कई खिदमात लोगों की आसानी के लिए फराहम करता आया है, जैसे नई गाड़ियों को खरीदना, सेकेंड हैंड गाड़ियों की खरीदो फरोख्त, तिजारती गाड़ियां भी मैसर होंगी और 2 व्हीलर व्हीकल्स भी दस्तयाब यहीं। आपके लिए गाड़ी चलाना आसान हो, उसके लिए मारुति ड्राइविंग स्कूल की खिदमात, अपनी गाड़ी के लिए जरूरी सामान खरीदना हो या चलते चलते गाड़ी खराब हो जाए और ठीक करानी हो, उसके लिए वर्कशॉप भी यहीं। तशरीफ लाएं जैम कैश व्हीकल्स, हैदरपुरा, श्रीनगर। हमें खिदमत करने का मौका दें।
आपके एक्सचेंज रोड में पैदा होने से लेकर
जी
आपके वालिद साहब के जम्मू ट्रांसफर होने तक,
हाँ,
इनके बीच में एक बहुत ही बड़ा लैंडमार्क डेवलपमेंट होता है जम्मू कश्मीर में।
हाँ,
वो है 1947।
वाह, वो तो मुझे पूरा याद है।
तो है क्या 1947 की क्या यादें हैं आपको?
मैं आपको सुनाती हूँ पूरी तरह। ये जब 1947 था, हमारी जॉइंट फैमिली थी। मेरी ग्रैंड मदर जिनके बारे में मैंने आपको बताया ना, और मेरी चाची, उनके 3 बच्चे उस वक्त थे, लड़के, और मेरे पेरेंट्स, और मेरी बड़ी बहन की शादी हो चुकी थी और मेरे बड़े भाई की शादी भी हो चुकी थी। लेकिन हम 2 बहनें थी, छोटी वाली, और हमारे थे साथ में भाभी, बड़े भाई जिनकी शादी हुई थी। भाभी के 2 छोटे छोटे बच्चे थे और मेरी बहन भी वही थी। सॉरी, आई फॉरगॉट, बहन नहीं गई थी ससुराल क्योंकि उनके फादर इन लॉ थे प्रोफेसर जयालाल कौल। ही हैड बीन ट्रांसफर्ड टू जम्मू, so she was staying with us and her husband was undergoing training in बनारस। उस ज़माने में छोटी उम्र में शादी होती थी। मेरी एल्डेस्ट बहन की शादी हुई थी जब वो सिर्फ 15 साल की थी। तो अब 17 साल की उम्र में उनके 2 छोटे छोटे बच्चे थे, तो वो हमारे पास ही थी। तो अब जब इतना हमने सुना शोर गुल, मैं तो छोटी थी लेकिन बिल्कुल अवेयर थी। इतना तो मुझे क्लियरली याद है कि नारे लग रहे थे बाहर से ज़बरदस्त। और फिर सडनली क्या हुआ, सुबह सवेरे मेरे फादर ने कहा, चलो तुम लोगों को यहाँ से जाना है, यहाँ सेफ नहीं है, ये रेडर्स, ट्राइबल रेडर्स आए हुए कबायली, और शाल्टेंग पहुँच गए हैं, थोड़ी देर में ही यहाँ पहुँचेंगे, तो उससे पहले तुम लोग को सेफ जगह जाना है। और आपको पता सेफ जगह कौन थी, कहाँ हमको भेजा सबको? महमूद अहमद अली शाह के घर में द्रुगजन। डॉक्टर नसीर का नाम आपने?
बिल्कुल जाना है।
जी हाँ, डॉक्टर नसीर और मेरे एक भाई जो इस वक्त बाहर थे, बहुत बचपन के दोस्त थे गहरे, और मेरे फादर इन लॉ महमूदा जी को भी बहुत अच्छी तरह जानते थे। माय फादर, सॉरी, नॉट फादर इन लॉ, माय फादर एंड महमूदा जी ऑल्सो न्यू ईच अदर बिकॉज दे वर ऑल इन द एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट। तो इतनी क्लोजनेस थी इन दोनों फैमिलियों की कि इन्होंने कहा हमारे लिए सेफ्टी वही है। तो हम जी निकले, सुबह सवेरे रवाना किया हमको। लेकिन ये था कि इसमें एक इंटरेस्टिंग बात आपको हंसाऊंगी। ये जो लेडीज़ के पास तो अपना होता ना तुम्हारा सोना काफ़ी था, तो उन्होंने कहा कि तो छोड़ नहीं सकते हम। तो मेरी चाची जी ने रात को अपने पेटीकोट में जेब सिलवाए, सुई से जेब बनवाए, और सुबह सवेरे सारा गोल्ड शोल्ड अपने उन जेबों में रख के, मेरी मदर ने भी ऐसा किया होगा, चल पड़ी हम सब लोग द्रगजन पैदल। मैं, मेरी बहन और एक और बहन, भाभी, मेरी दादी, मेरी माँ, मेरी चाची और उनके बच्चे 2। और वहाँ पहुँचे तो हमको उन्होंने कमरा दिया। वहाँ बड़ी थी इनकी माँ, उनको सब बुआ जी कहते थे, बड़ी अफेक्शनेट वार्म मेट्रियार्क थी। शी वाज सिटिंग इन अ चारपाई कंपाउंड watching over everybody's comfort and welfare, and my mother, my chachi and my dadi would not eat in their house.
अच्छा।
उनके लिए साथ ही आया था, जो घर का पंडित कुक था वो साथ आया था, लेकिन हम लोगों ने वो खाना खाया जो उन्होंने बनाया। उस ज़माने में आपको बताऊं मैं अच्छी तरह से कितना प्यार था कम्युनिटीज़ में, लेकिन जो एल्डर जनरेशन थी वो एक दूसरे के घर में खाना नहीं खाते थे पका हुआ। My mother's closest friend was Dr. Ali Jan's wife who lived next door, but they were bosom buddies. बहनों से ज़्यादा उनको प्यार एक दूसरे का था, लेकिन खाना नहीं खाते, पका हुआ खाना नहीं खाते थे। तो हमको जी रखा गया वहाँ, 2-3 दिन हम उनके यहाँ रहे, ये जो शाह थे द्रगजन वाले, द्रगजन के मकान में। और फिर उसके बाद आए वापस, क्योंकि उस दिन कबालियों को फिर उन्हें रिट्रीट किया था ना विद द इंडियन आर्मी कमिंग। महाराजा हैड साइन दैट, यू सी, एक्सेशन का साइन सिग्नेचर किया था, और इंडियन आर्मी आई, एयरफोर्स आया, तो फिर हम लोग वापस घर आए। लेकिन इसके रिपरकशंस बहुत हुए। सबसे बड़ा ये हुआ कि वहाँ पर उन्हीं दिनों में उन्होंने शुरू किया एक विमेंस सेल्फ डिफेंस कोर, कि औरतों को देंगे हम मिलिट्री ट्रेनिंग सो दैट दे कैन डिफेंड देमसेल्व्स। तो मेरी बड़ी बहन एकदम वॉलंटियर करके ज्वाइन किया, और उन्होंने मेरी दूसरी बहन का नाम भी लिखा, हालांकि वो उस वक्त सिर्फ 12 साल की थी, लेकिन दे वेंट। उस मोहल्ले की और भी जो लेडीज़ थी, और एक थी वहाँ उस ज़माने में फ्रेडा बेदी, शी वॉज पार्ट ऑफ दैट विमेन सेल्फ डिफेंस कोर। महमूदा जी तो थी ही, उनकी बहन बेगम जलालुद्दीन, और बहुत सारी पंडित लेडीज़ ऑल्सो। They underwent military training there. So this was the aftermath of the tribal invasion.
तो वो जो एग्जिबिट होता था, वो हमलावर खबरदार हम कश्मीर,
जी,
वो तो वही था पलेडियम के आसपास ही।
नारे थे ना जबरदस्त, वो नारे थे। एक तो था हमलावर खबरदार हम कश्मीरी हैं तैयार, शेरी कश्मीर का क्या इरशाद, हिंदू मुस्लिम सिख इतिहाद, बढ़े चलो महाज पर बढ़े चलो, लड़ेंगे हम लुटेरों और हम लवारों के साथ, वतन फरोश बेवफा और कातिलों के साथ, कदम कदम बढ़ेंगे हम, महाज पर लड़ेंगे हम। और हमारे झंडे क्या बड़ा अच्छा गाना था तब, वो तो अब किसी को याद नहीं होगा। लहरा है कश्मीर के झंडे, बाजुए बेशमशीर के झंडे, हलवाले दिलगीर के झंडे, हर सू लहरा हर दम लहरा, ताबे क़यामत पे हम लहरा, लहरा है कश्मीर के झंडे। So it was a very, very stirring time, full of patriotic fervor and great belief that only wonderful things would keep happening. And they did for some time, till other forces took over. But in the beginning it was a heady time, full of optimism, full of tremendous patriotism, and no trace of any kind of communal animosity. And you know, the people who had joined the militia, young men, my brother had also joined, but then when one other young man from the neighborhood had also joined, and it was a tragedy that the other young man died on the front. उसका नाम था पुष्कर जाडू, बेचारा 18 साल का टोटल था, लेकिन फ्रंट पे लड़ते लड़ते गोली लगी और मर गया। तो ये ज़माना था। फिर उस वक़्त एक और चीज़ थी कि बड़ी ज़बरदस्त बिलीव थी कि थिंग्स कैन ओनली गेट बेटर, और कंप्लीट ट्रस्ट इन शेख अब्दुल्ला कि जो करेगा अल करेगा, वांगन करेगा, बब करेगा, बब करेगा, वो भी एक बात थी। और ये था कि बिलीफ थी कि अब तो बिल्कुल एजुकेशन फ्री हो गई, सारे लैंड लॉर्ड्स की चली गई होल्डिंग्स, लैंड टू द टिलर which transformed Kashmiri rural people. Suddenly they became owners of what they had been tilling till then without allowed to keep only 1/4, and the rest would go to the landlord. So all those transformational changes took place, and it was an air of optimism. So we thought nothing would go bad. Then soon this women's college was set up in 1950. See, my eldest sister was, I think, very bright. She had done her matriculation privately. ये जो था ना land to the tiller, it was a revolutionary thing.
Yes.
It's not done anywhere else, and nobody acknowledges it today. And I remember one comment that one gentleman made when people had suddenly started turning against Sheikh Abdullah in the early 80s. When suddenly there was this misinformation campaign about he had sold out Kashmir and all the rest of it. At that time, I remember one gentleman arguing with another person, a Muslim, and he was telling him, you can forget everything, but don't forget that Sheikh Abdullah turned you from a Hato to a Hazrat. I thought that was remarkable, because till then people had no respect for Kashmiris. They were referred to as Hatos. The Punjabis dominated us, the Dogras dominated us, and we were supposed to be illiterate and absolutely filthy, dirty, nothing. Our whole culture and everything had come into disabuse. But then I think he was the person who restored confidence to people. History has a way of teasing you and deceiving you.
Yes. ये जो दौर था जिसके बारे में हम बात कर रहे हैं,
ये दौर
इसमें दो लोग बड़े इम्पोर्टेंट थे।
हाँ बताइए।
एक का ज़वाल हो रहा था, दूसरे का उरूज हो रहा था।
हाँ बताइए।
हरी सिंह वाज वो नीचे आ रहा
on the decline.
On the decline, and Sheikhullah was on the rise. How you saw that transition as a kid from a distance, on basis of what was happening, transpiring within the family, because your family was an emancipated one.
I'm glad you asked me this question, because it reminds me of the 40s, early 40s or mid 40s. When I had suddenly started becoming aware of other things apart from my games, which I played with myself. And it was the time of the Second World War.
Yes.
My father and my two brothers would in the evening spread out a cloth map of the world. And then they would be looking at it and charting the course of the Allied armies and the German things. They would feel happy when the Allies seemed to make some advance. But on the other hand, they would also have some sympathy for the Germans because of this Subhash Chandra Bose.
Yes.
Because of that. So this I didn't understand at that time, but I was very conscious of the fact that they were tracing these lines on the map of the world. So at that time I became a little aware of what the larger world was like, apart from the home in which I lived. And then what happened was that they were also keeping track of the freedom movement in India. Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, they would be talking about them all the time. And of course, Sheikh Abdullah, who was somebody very close to the Indian National Congress, because they were on his side against the Maharaja, because they were against Maharajas. So the decline of Maharaja in public opinion had already started. Because I could see in my own family people resentful the Maharaja's ways and hopeful that Kashmir was going to be transformed if a popular government was installed. That idea I had acquired, I had sort of picked up from the conversations they used to have. But I also remember in 1947 itself, just before the tribal invasion, you see, those days the Maharaja used to hold a darbar on Dasera Day.
Yes.
And on that darbar, all the gazetted officers were supposed to present him with a sovereign.
Yes.
And the sovereign would come from the treasury. The gazetted officer paid 15 rupees at the treasury. He was given a gold sovereign.
Yes.
And the gazetted officer had to dress up in a traditional Dogra aristocratic dress. They had to wear chudidar pajamas and a brocade or Banaras silk achkan. And they had to wear a sword on the side. I remember my father dressing up for that, and it was quite a job for the servant to pull up that chudidar pajama. It was so tight.
Yes.
But once it was all ready, then he would leave and go to the darbar, have a silk handkerchief in his hand, put a sovereign there, and present it to the Maharaja. He would only nod, and somebody else would pick up the sovereign and deposit it back in the treasury. But the 15 rupees that were paid for it from the treasury came from the pocket of the gazetted officer. The sovereign, the gold sovereign came from the treasury, went back to the treasury, but the transaction of 15 rupees was paid by the gazetted officer. So this was the date, and I could see that there was resentment. They didn't enjoy doing this. I remember how irritated my father used to be that he had to dress up in this way, which was alien, completely alien.
It was a cultural aggression kind of a thing.
I don't know whether he thought of cultural aggression those days, but it certainly was an imposition, which he didn't like to do. And I remember the struggle. He used to get so annoyed when the pajama refused to climb up his heel. कभी कागज उसमें रखते थे, कभी कुछ करते थे उसको pull up करने के लिए. And he thought that he cut a ridiculous figure, but it couldn't be helped. So Maharaja was not a popular person in my family, at least I remember. I don't know about Kashmiri Pandits, but he wasn't, because you see my two brothers were slightly Marxist also, because that was the fashion those days.
Yes.
And also my young number 2 brother, who later on joined the Indian Administrative Service, used to only wear khadi those days. And that khadi also had to be washed at home. He would wash it himself and wear it. Kurta pajama of khadi. So there was an antipathy towards Maharaja in our house. And we thought that he was somebody who was ruling us, and he had no business to be ruling us. We didn't think in those times, at that time we didn't think that it was a Muslim majority state or something. We just thought that it was unfair. So the tribal invasion was a big catalyst. Then I remember Mahatma Gandhi coming to Kashmir soon after the tribal invasion. And he came and he was accompanied by Begum Abdullah. And he addressed a large gathering of women in Sheetalnath, which was a Pandit enclave.
He spoke to them?
He spoke to them.
वो कभी कलाम बंद करते थे ना as part of his fasting?
नहीं, उन दिनों तो फास्ट नहीं करते थे.
Okay.
वो तो आए थे. I remember him clearly because I went with my mother.
अच्छा.
My mother also went. सारी औरतों को कहा था चलिएगा. And he was accompanied by Begum Abdullah, I remember. And then he said, बड़ा अच्छी स्पीच दी, मुझे याद नहीं है, इतना मैं attention भी नहीं पे किया होगा, but I remember him clearly. He had a wide chest, just a khadi thing on his shoulder, and a dhoti here, legs were bare, everything bare. I don't remember what he said, but I remember that he had later on told somebody that I can see light only in Kashmir, because there were no communal rights here. बाकी सब जगह तो बहुत बुरा हाल हो रहा था आफ्टर 47. कश्मीर में तो कोई कम्युनल राइट नहीं हुआ. तो गांधी जी सपोज टू हैव सेड आई कैन ओनली सी लाइट फ्रॉम कमिंग फ्रॉम कश्मीर. ये दिस मच आई रिमेम्बर ऑफ द ट्राइबल इन्वेजन. कहा ना कि हमारे टाइम में, हमारे वे भी ग्रो अप, शेख अब्दुल्ला वाज द हीरो एंड महाराजा वाज द विलन. There was no doubt in our minds.
महाराजा हरि सिंह को आपने देखा कभी?
मैंने कभी नहीं देखा. कहते वो जुलूस में निकलते थे, लोग देखते थे, पर मैंने उनको कभी नहीं देखा. मैंने अलबत्ता उनकी वाइफ महारानी जो थी तारा देवी को देखा है जब मैं जम्मू के स्कूल में थी. उस वक्त तक तो he had been deposed.
Yes.
But she was allowed to come to Jammu, so she came one day to the school. Along with, interestingly, Begum Zafar Ali.
अच्छा.
Begum Zafar Ali at that time was the inspectress of schools. And she was also quite a wonderful person. बहुत ट्रेडिशनल थी. कहाँ आपको पता है किस फैमिली की थी वो? Aristocratic Muslim family of Shias, but she used to wear a साड़ी. और सर पर कुछ कवर नहीं था.
Yes.
हल्के ग्रे बाल थे, थोड़े थोड़े कटे हुए. She looked like a European lady.
Yes.
तो वो भी थी और ये कुछ फंक्शन होगा जिसमें ये भी उसको भी बुलाया था. स्कूल में जब मैं कुछ महीने थी वहाँ मैंने अनफॉर्चुनेटली इन्हीं को देखा और किसी डिग्नेटरी को नहीं देखा.
जब आपने शेख मोहम्मद अब्दुल्ला को पहली बार देखा अपनी नजरों से, मतलब नजदीक से,
हाँ, बड़ी टावरिंग पर्सनालिटी थी और आपको पता नहीं है कि वो कितना इंटरेस्ट ले रहे थे इन वीमेंस एजुकेशन. ये जो वीमेंस कॉलेज बनाना भी उन्हीं का काम था, ये इतनी बड़ी ब्यूटीफुल बिल्डिंग कॉलेज को देना भी उनका ही काम था. और उसके बाद ही यूज्ड टू कम एंड विजिट द कॉलेज every month to see about the building construction, what was happening, what kind of education girls were receiving. Till 53 it was a regular thing. And after 75 also he came to the college and he was very much interested. Very much interested, and he had a very towering personality. First of all, he was very tall.
Yes.
And he used to be very well dressed also. He used to wear very nice suits when he came to the college. पता नहीं सेक्रेटेरिएट में भी क्या पहनते थे और भी पहनते होंगे, बट सूट तो डेफिनेटली आई रिमेम्बर. एंड ऑल्सो ही हैड अ वेरी नाइस वे ऑफ स्पीकिंग टू पीपल एंड एनकरेजिंग एंड यू नो टेकिंग इंटरेस्ट इन लिटिल डिटेल्स. I'll tell you something which is of course not of this period. It is after he came back in 75. Then he was the chief minister. Now he was not the prime minister.
Yes.
तो वहाँ पे क्या था कि मैं used to teach in the college. So there was a vacancy for a principal somewhere. So I was also asked to go for the interview. I was not interested in administration, but they said that if they call you, you have to go. Anyway, I went, so there was an expert from outside who had come. Then that lady apparently had recommended that I should go for teaching in the university rather than the college. Somehow she was impressed with my knowledge of English literature. So she had spoken to this Sheikh Abdullah. She was quite a distinguished professor from outside Kashmir. And she had suggested to him. So he called me to his office. He said, we are planning to send you to
University.
England for a thing, and then you are to take charge of the university. So I said, I'm sorry, I can't go. I have 2 small children. And he said, ये तुम लोगों की औरतों की आदत है, जब मौका मिलता है तब नहीं करते हो, फिर कहते हो हमें मौका नहीं मिलता. मैंने कहा जी, I'm very sorry, I can't leave my small, they are at an age where I can't leave them. मुझे ये भी कहा, why can't your husband look after them? मैंने कहा, that's not possible. He has his own work. This is my encounter with him later on.
शेख साहब तो हीरो थे, शेख साहब तो बड़े टावरिंग थे.
हमारे सब उस जमाने में जब पहले थे बिल्कुल ही कोई डाउट नहीं था. जब दोबारा भी आए, we thought that everything would improve now. ये बहुत फेथ थी लोगों को कि अभी तक जो गड़बड़ हो रही थी अब सब ठीक हो जाएगा, मगर नहीं हुआ था ठीक. Because by that time he was not very well, also he was unwell.
What happened in 1953? You were in Lal Chowk. Lal Chowk is the epicenter of news, the epicenter of action and epicenter of rumors.
The amazing thing is कि जो जहाँ हम रहते थे वो इतना, हालांकि लाल चौक के पास था, लेकिन फिर भी बिल्कुल ही आइसोलेटेड था. एक तरफ से प्रोटेक्टेड था सब तरफ से. और हम उस वक्त, ये जो आप पूछ रहे हैं किस वक्त की बात, 53. हाँ, ये तो हमको पता था कि बहुत गड़बड़ हो रही है. कॉलेज बंद हो गया, काफ़ी प्रोटेस्ट बहुत हो रहे थे और टॉगे सारे बंद हो गए. सबसे ज़्यादा सब मुश्किल हो गई मेरे फादर को कि वो जाया करते थे once a week to सफा कदल, which was his ancestral home. उनके cousins वहाँ थे, older people also, and now it was difficult for him to go, क्योंकि वॉक करके कितनी दूर जाते. ये हमने देखा. और फिर स्ट्राइक थी, बंद था, बहुत बड़ा ज़बरदस्त प्रोटेस्ट था. बख्शी साहब का तो हमको रिमोटली भी कोई नहीं था उनके साथ कनेक्शन और एनीथिंग. लेकिन ये था कि उस वक़्त सिर्फ लग रहा था कश्मीरी पंडितों को भी शायद बख्शी गुलाम मोहम्मद ने बचाया कश्मीर को, वरना शेख साहब की क्या साजिश थी, क्या थी, वो थी कि नहीं थी, लेकिन वो वहाँ पे इम्प्रेशन दिया गया था कि ही हैज़ सेव्ड कश्मीर फॉर इंडिया. बख्शी गुलाम मोहम्मद. एक बड़ा ओपेरा लिखा दीनानाथ नादिम ने,
yes,
बुम्बुरी अम्बरसल,
yes, बुम्बुरी अम्बरसल,
which was a kind of an allegory in which it seemed that imperialist powers in collusion with local actors were trying to grab Kashmir and it was an American conspiracy. And then it was because of the intervention of Soviet Russia and others that Kashmir was saved. So this Bombur Yambursal was allegorical that Yambursal is Kashmir and Bombur is India. Then Tufan and Harud and all kinds of evil forces are trying to separate them. But then with the intervention of the Russians, the situation is saved and Kashmir is united with India. Bombur and Yambursal are united.
Bombur Yambursal played a very key role in the International Naidmus takeoff. He moved around mostly in USSR then.
Yes, because they were Marxists, you see. ये जो सारी जो थे Indian Writers Association, was progressive writers, they were all Marxists. And all of them were invited to Russia. They got the Lenin Prize or something or the other. वो तो थे, बिल्कुल. Nadim was certainly a Marxist. He was, and he did believe that this was an imperialist conspiracy to snatch Kashmir for the Western Bloc, Anglo-Indian Bloc. तो उसलिए उन्होंने वो बड़े पैशनेटली सोच के वो प्ले ऑपरा लिखा था, जिसमें कि उन्होंने दिखाया कि बाद में, और फिर सबसे ज़्यादा इंटरेस्टिंग बात है कि उन्हीं दिनों in 55 Khrushchev and Bulganin came to Kashmir.
Yes.
And this opera was presented to them. This women's college का परफॉर्म, मैं भी उसमें थी, हम सब उसमें थे, बम्बुर यम्बुर्सल में, उनके सामने परफॉर्म किया और उनको समझाया गया कि ये आपके लिए कॉम्प्लीमेंट है कि आपने बचाया है कश्मीर को उस वेस्टर्न ब्लॉक में जाने से.
अच्छा.
That happened in 55, जब वो जवाहर टनल भी इनॉग्रेट हुई थी.
Yes.
So in Bakshi Sahab's time, of course, he did a lot of building work also, that you can't deny. But I don't know, you see, you have to read the stories that were written during that period. They will give you an idea what the common man was feeling. The frustrations they were feeling and the kind of betrayal they were feeling. You can find it in not in the writings of Dinanath Nadim or other Marxists, but in the writings of short story writers like Ali Muhammad Lone or Sufi Ghulam Muhammad or others. Because they had a hand on the pulse of the people, they were talking frankly about the resentment and the raj of the Halka president and the other petty officials who were making the life of ordinary Kashmiris very difficult, which was not talked about, but you can find it in the literature of the time. Even Mahjoor actually has written one poem in which he says ki what is the use of this azadi.
Azadi, yes.
Kya hua ye? Will you Mubarak Shusadi Gare Aaye Azadi? Actually, I have translated it into English. That sentiment of how people felt betrayed. They thought they were getting azadi, but what they were getting in return was exploitation of another kind. Anyway, you can all find it if you really read the literature of the time, you will find that they are honest people. And they also talk about the tortures that were done in the prisons, which Kashmiris used to talk about. I don't want to name any names, but the officials who were doing all that stuff, and the officials who were rigging elections and stuff, all that is in the writings of the sensitive short story writers or poets of the time. Historians may write about it later, but they have mentioned it right at the time of when it happened.
Yes, you have lived that era.
Yes, I have lived that era, but only, you can say, second hand.
Yes.
By hearing about it. I have not participated in any of those things. And we were like a cocoon. The college was like a cocoon.
Yes.
It was a kind of perfection which we had built with our own effort, and we thought we were absolutely safe from the rest of the world. क्योंकि वो जो प्रिंसिपल हमारी थी उस वक़्त की, वो ऐसी ज़बरदस्त लेडी थी कि आज आप सोच भी नहीं सकते. उनका नाम ही था ऐसा रखा ज़बरदस्त, so courageous she was. आपको पता है उनके सामने इन्होंने ये रीगल चौक में जहाँ ये कॉर्नर है ना ऑपोजिट विमेंस कॉलेज, वहाँ पर पहले तो एक वन स्टोरी थी, दुकानें शुकानें, दैट डिडंट बॉदर द कॉलेज. उस वक्त उन्होंने दूसरी तीसरी मंजिल बनानी शुरू की. And she ensured that they wouldn't have a single window overlooking the college. उनको blank wall एक.
Who was she?
महमूदा अहमद
अली शाह. Okay.
ज़बरदस्त औरत थी और उनने बनने नहीं दिया उनको. क्योंकि उनको गवर्नमेंट का भी सपोर्ट था. शी वॉज क्लोज टू सादिक साहब because they had the same kind of, political views, liberal, secular, and very close to the Gandhian and the Nehru philosophy. And she never wore any kind of, she only wore handloom sarees. आप हैरान होंगे कि वो साड़ी ही पहनती थी सारे वक्त. और उनको देख के जो बाद में भी प्रिंसिपल आई कश्मीरी मुस्लिम भी, वो भी एज प्रिंसिपल साड़ी ही पहनती थी. ये सब तो आपके लिए बिलीव करना भी मुश्किल
नई बात है.
आपको बताऊँ, एक बार हमें उस जमाने में प्रिंसिपल बनी थी महमूदा जी के बाद, शमला मुफ्ती उनका नाम था.
शमला मुफ्ती, यस.
शमला मुफ्ती की भी बड़ी ज़बरदस्त कहानी है. वो बहुत ही ट्रेडिशनल कंजर्वेटिव फैमिली से में शादी उनकी हुई थी. लगभग वहाँ पे जहाँ बड़ी मस्जिद है ना, वहीं पे उनके ससुराल थे. लेकिन फिर उन्होंने कॉलेज आई, पढ़ाई की, बीए किया. शादी के बाद फिर एमए करने के लिए अलीगढ़ गई फ़ारसी में. वहाँ तब तक वो सलवार कमीज़ और बुर्का पहनती थी. जब वो अलीगढ़ से वापस आई, बुर्का नहीं था, दुपट्टा था सर पे, और हमारे कॉलेज में पढ़ाने लगी एज अ लेक्चरर इन फारसी. Then she rose to be the principal. She was sent to नवाकदल कॉलेज एज प्रिंसिपल. और क्या हुआ कि जो ही वो प्रिंसिपल बनी, उन्होंने शलवार कमीज़ दुपट्टा बुर्का छोड़कर साड़ी पहनना शुरू की. एंड शी यूज्ड टू वेयर ए साड़ी बिकॉज टिल देन इट वाज बिलीव्ड बिकॉज ऑफ महमूदा जीज ट्रेडिशन कि जो स्टाफ मेंबर्स हैं कॉलेज के, दे शुड लुक डिफरेंट फ्रॉम स्टूडेंट्स. उनको साड़ी ही ज़्यादातर पहनती थी, चाहे हिंदू होती या मुस्लिम. और उसके बाद शमला जी वैसे ही रही. जब वो रिटायर हुई, उसके बाद भी शी वॉज वेरी एक्टिव इन द सोशल वर्क एरिया. शी वॉज आई थिंक ऑलरेडी सेक्रेटरी ऑफ द फैमिली प्लानिंग एसोसिएशन ऑफ इंडिया ऑल्सो. बट देन लेटर ऑन व्हेन मिलिटेंसी केम, then she had to submit to the will of the Dukhtarane Millat also, because anyway whatever happened, so she again was transformed. So you can see from her, looking at Shamla Mufti as a kind of an icon of that time, you can see the graph. You can see the rise and the decline of women of Kashmir.
When did you join this women college as lecturer?
That is also that's also a different story altogether. You see, after doing my graduation, I did BA honors in English. Then fortunately for me, the university campus was not there. They had been given a small building in SP College premises next to Women's College,
Yes.
where they ran the postgraduate department of English. So after doing this English honors passing, so straight away I went to do my MA. And you must remember that these were very close to where I lived, just 5 minutes away.
Yes.
Most convenient it was. At that time we had only 3 professors teaching all of us for previous as well as MA class, but they were dedicated people. Professor S.L. Pandit was the head, Professor M.S. Vant was the next professor, Professor Apurab Somnath. They were quite, I should say, gifted people, because they could just 3 of them teaching 2 whole classes for MA, previous and final. Anyway, so then the results came out, and I had topped that postgraduate department of English. Though I missed my first class by 3 marks, but it doesn't matter in those days, it didn't matter. So then what happened was there was no idea of working or anything, because nobody in my family, no woman had worked before. And among Kashmiri Pandits, it was not supposed to be the done thing, particularly if you are unmarried. So I was young, I was not married. So then my friend from the college, she had heard that there is a vacancy for a teacher in the college. She said, why don't you come with me? I would like to speak to the principal, but I'm a bit scared of her. She has a good opinion of you, so you come with me. So I just accompanied her. When the principal saw us, she told me, what are you, your results are out? I said, yes. She said, I know you have done well. I said, yes. What are you doing now? Nothing. Come and teach in the college from tomorrow. Our Zia Durrani was a lecturer. She is going on study leave. You come and teach in her place. No order, no application, nothing. So I took her word, and the next day I wore my mother's sari and went to college. And this head of the department of English had been my teacher in the college. So she handed over registers to me, go and take this class. It was as, good casual as you can think of.
It was like joining 9th class.
Yes. You can say that. It was really like that. The 9th class, due to my ability to write 2 sentences of English, and here because Bismillah-ji knew me. So I came home and I was very happy. Next day I borrowed my mother's thick sari, because till then I used to wear salwar kameez. So I thought I should look a little more dignified as a professor, and went and took the class and everything and came home happily. But then there was such an uproar. Even my uncle was very angry with my father. ये क्या करो तो है, ये कुछ कह रही है मिस पका मेल ने मिस कहीं कुछ कह रही नहीं थे मिस ये कुछ शुक्रान क्या शरीफ घर लड़की करी नौकरी. So my father was also a bit nonplussed at that time. He was also, in spite of all his, security and his own ideas, his own more modern thing, he also felt a little threatened. So he told me, why don't you forget about it? I said, I can't let the girls down. They liked me, I've established a kind of a relationship. Why should I stop? And Mahmooda ji will be very angry. So he didn't know what to say. But I continued, and Mahmooda ji called my father and said, please don't stop her. She's doing a good job and we need people like her. She was very complimentary, I must say. And the girls are happy, so you better forget about stopping her. So then the whole outcry died down and I continued to teach.
Your job was made formal.
It was, I tell you, you will not believe it. I have not written a single application for that job. Mahmooda ji sent this whole record of my academic record, plus the testimonials I had got from different people. She sent them to the secretariat. Then they called me for an interview. Public Service Commission का interview होता. तो वो interview के लिए तो मैं गई और उसके बाद I was confirmed. In 58 I joined when I was about 20 years old. And then in 67 they had a series of interviews to promote lecturers to become professors. So I was selected there also. I became professor in 1967. Then later on another interview for principals, which I didn't want to go for because I had no interest in administration. But they said that since they have asked you, you must go. So I went there and then they didn't know what to do with me. So they said, okay, we'll give you the status and rank and everything of a principal, but you can continue to be head of Department of English. So that's how I continued.
So most of your career was in the Mullah Rose?
All of it. All of it.
So you were never shifted?
No, never. I'll tell you.
You were born on the same patch of land? You studied on the same patch of land? You served the same patch of land.
But then
what a fortune
marriage,
you had.
I told you right in the beginning that I consider myself to be very fortunate in where I was born, first of all. The family into which I was born. And the circumstances around me at that time, which enabled me to do things without any problem at all. Problems arose much later.
What was that?
When 90s happened.
Oh, 90s is too distant, but before that you raised your family, started
Yes, I did that.
So was it your choice?
To do what?
To raise a family?
What do you mean? Did I have a choice? Did any girl have a choice at that time?
I don't know.
No. Since I didn't give up my job and my father didn't know what was going to happen, I was also applying to Delhi colleges also. I thought it's getting too much. इन लोगों को मैं लंबे मुंह नहीं देख सकती. मैं जाती हूँ दिल्ली. लेकिन वो उससे पहले ही this proposal of marriage came from this family, and my father couldn't resist it. He said they are a very well-known family. The father-in-law has a wonderful reputation, and the young man is a forest officer from the Forest Research Institute. Since they are sending the proposal, we should consider it seriously. I didn't have a choice. They decided and I got married. And then after that I had children in quick succession, but continued to work. But I was fortunate in this, by being married into this family also, because my mother-in-law was also a forward-looking lady. And she was actually not from Kashmir. She was a Kashmiri, but those from that family of Kashmiris who had migrated to
Allahabad.
Punjab. Lahore.
Okay.
Lahore and Amritsar. And then she could read and write English, Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi. At that time, because she was born and brought up in Lahore and Amritsar, she had seen Bhagat Singh's professor. She had seen even that Jawaharlal Nehru, Maulana Azad and all, because they were in the midst of a very emancipated society of the Punjab. So that was fortunate. So I continued, and Mahmooda ji was always very supportive, always. And those days we didn't have this problem of biometric attendance.
It was too early.
We could come, and when we had to take a class before that, we could come, we could take our classes and go home. I remember I never stayed in the college unless it was necessary beyond 2:30. I would be home before my children went for school. I would be home before they came back from school.
So they actually had no idea that mother is going.
They knew I
they
was
knew
going.
it, but
of course, but they didn't miss me.
Yes.
They didn't miss me, which was possible. क्योंकि बच्चे तो इनका तो 9 बजे ही जाना होता था. फिर ही आते थे 4 बजे के करीब. तो उससे पहले हम यहाँ होते थे. और मेरा ये भी सबसे बड़ा लकी था कि मेरी मदर का घर मेरे कॉलेज के साथ 5 मिनट का रास्ता था. तो when they were very small, I used to carry them in the morning, leave them with my mother, and जो भी कोई उनकी देखभाल करने वाला होता था उस वक़्त, वो और कॉलेज गई, बीच में आई, देख लिया, फिर गई. So they didn't miss me that way. Those were wonderful times, you know. But we didn't think that they would ever change, but they did.
That era in which you were teaching in Lal Chowk, despite the fact that it was secluded, isolated by walls and invigilation, kind of a thing.
No.
But there is no technically an insulation possible. So events were happening. There were 2 major events that happened. One was the Moy Muqaddas agitation.
That is very...
Another was that when that Pandit young girl, Parmeshwari agitation.
I know.
What are the remembrance?
Of course, I remember all those things very well. But you see, before that, we remember 65 also. We
Yes.
forget that.
Please let us know.
63. Moy Muqaddas was 63. 63 mein hua, December 63 mein. You see, suddenly we realized that something terrible had happened in Kashmir because everything came to a standstill. The people were in a state of, what shall I say, such a tremendous shock, as if they had been shell shocked, because they couldn't believe that the Moy Muqaddas could be gone. And then, you know, you were not born at that time. You couldn't be born.
I was born in 1966.
So that's what I'm telling you. But you know, the whole Kashmiri society was galvanized into action. There were processions, people didn't cook at home. They used to have roadside kitchens in which they would feed everyone. And in the processions, there was no difference between Hindu and Muslim. My mother was also a part of many of those processions, because you see, her parental house was near Habakadal. So she used to go there sometimes. So one day when she was coming back, the procession was started. So she became a part of the procession and came all the way to Lal Chowk with the procession. So there was no difference between Hindu and Muslim. It was like a culture shock to the whole Kashmiri community.
A collective loss.
Yes, collective loss. Because you see, in those days, I remember there was no difference between one shrine and another. If my mother would go to Reshpir, she would also have Kahne vs. Jai. She believed in this Kahno. Kahno मालूम है ना?
I understand.
तो दस्तगीर साहब. तो दस्तगीर साहब का कहवा वो बनवाती. कोई बीमार होता था, कहती थी दस्तगीर साहब in Kahne vs. Jai. Then she would feed people with chai and everything. So, and Saraj Sharif was something they went to every time. So till then there was no really difference between At least, see, as I told you, first of all, the closeness between Hindus and Muslims was taken for granted. Our closest friends were Muslims. We never thought कि they are Muslims. मेरी जो childhood friend थी, next door रहती थी, अर्जुमंद, अभी तक उसके साथ दोस्ती है. कभी सोचा भी नहीं ये हिंदू है या मुस्लिम. हमारे टाइम पे बिल्कुल नहीं, ध्यान ही नहीं था. तो खैर मैं बता रही थी मोए मुकद्दस के बारे में. So this was a collective expression of grief and mourning and sorrow, and there was tremendous anger against the administration at that time. So one of the first things that happened, the violent thing that happened, was that the properties of Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad's family were set on fire. उसमें 2 सिनेमा
थे आपके बगल में,
रीगल और अमरीश सिनेमा, दोनों, वो दोनों जला दिए और सारा रीगल का एरिया सारा जला दिया था. इतना गुस्सा था लोगों को. और बाद में भी जब कभी फिल्म यहाँ चलती थी, आपको यकीन नहीं होगा, यहाँ कई दफ़े बिजली जाती थी ना, फिर वो 3rd क्लास वाले शोर बजाते थे, हो बिजली अगर नहीं गए थे. तो वन ऑफ द स्लोगन्स दे यूज्ड टू यूज वाज ऑलवेज असली मुजरिम पेश करो.
अच्छा.
बिकॉज इट वाज अ मिस्ट्री दैट वाज नेवर सॉल्व्ड कि हु हैड एक्चुअली टेकन अवे दैट मोए मुकद्दस एंड हाउ वाज इट रिस्टोर्ड. Kashmiris were never satisfied as to what actually had happened. So at every moment of anger, the slogan would rise, "Asli Mushrim pesh karo," which was never done. तो हाँ, दूसरी बात ये थी कि ये सिनेमास के साथ तो हमारा बड़ा क्लोज रिलेशनशिप था. हम बहुत फिल्म देखते थे बचपन से ही. मेरे फादर भी हमें अंग्रेज़ी फिल्म दिखाने ले जाते थे. पर्टिकुलरली अगर हिस्टोरिकल फिल्म होती, उसमें श्रीगल सिनेमा में आती थी, या कोई बड़ी मशहूर एक्ट्रेस होती उस ज़माने में की थी, वो ग्रेटा गार्बो उसको कहते थे. तो स्वीडिश थी लेकिन थी हॉलीवुड में, एंड वेरी ब्यूटीफुल. एंड माय फादर वाज अ फैन, सो ही यूज्ड टू टेक अस. क्वीन क्रिस्टीना एक उसकी फिल्म आई थी, मुझे अभी भी याद. ब्लैक एंड वाइट ही होती थी, यू नो. आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट द 40s.
यस.
एंड पैलेडियम में तो विमेंस गैलरी थी, उसमें हम चुपचाप आराम से बैठ के देखते थे फिल्म. तो फिल्मों का साथ हमारे, आप कह रहे थे ना कि आप उधर बैठे थे आइसोलेटेड, सारे दर्जी हमारे वहाँ थे बंड पे, और कॉफ़ी हाउस वहाँ था. कश्मीर बुक शॉप जो हमारी लाइफ का एक बहुत ही इंटेग्रल हिस्सा था, आपने देखा भी नहीं होगा.
बिल्कुल देखा नहीं, मैंने देखा है.
सफ़ेद दाढ़ी वाले सरदार जी को देखा?
बिल्कुल देखा है.
बहुत बचपन में देखा होगा. आपको याद है कैसा वो बुक शॉप?
Exactly, yes. I used to go there. I never had money to purchase, but I would go through Philip.
Oh yes, of course. And they had all the latest magazines also.
Yes.
They used to have this New York Times होता था, ये था Times Literary Supplement होता था, Encounter होता था. बाकी तो लोकल तो इंडियन तो सारे होते ही थे. और किताब आपको कोई भी चाहते हो अगर आप हो, वो कहते हैं बेटा अच्छा बताओ, 3 दिन के अंदर वो ला देते थे. It was a wonderful kind of an area in which I grew up. You cannot ever imagine anything like that.
But this is very new for me that Palladium had a gallery for women.
Oh yes,
movie goers.
We used to go as students and we used to hand over the money to the gatekeeper. उस ज़माने में ₹1.25 देना होता था, ₹1.25, और उसको पैसे देते थे, वही टिकट लाता था और मज़े से ऊपर बैठकर सेफ एनवायरनमेंट में फिल्म देखते थे. शोर भी मचाते थे, कुछ भी करते थे. और बाकी सब तो हमारी नेक्स्ट डोर ही था ना जहाँ हम रहते थे. तो जो फैशनेबल सबसे स्ट्रीट यहाँ थी बंड. वो तो आपको अब तो देखकर नहीं आपको वो यकीन आएगा कि वो क्या होता था एक ज़माने में. इट वॉज द फेवरेट प्रोमेनाड ऑफ ऑल द फैशनेबल पीपल ऑफ कश्मीर. many of them were not Kashmiris. They were Punjabis, outsiders, visitors, tourists, film stars. फिल्म स्टार्स को हमने देखा वहाँ चलते हुए. नसीम बानो और सायरा बानो. वहाँ पर एक बड़ी अच्छी एक एम्ब्रॉयडरी की दुकान थी लैम्बर्ट लेन में, उसका नाम था लाइट रोज. वहाँ पे उसको देखा हमने. नसीम बानो, आपने सुना नाम होगा?
नाम सुना.
दिलीप कुमार की वाइफ
सायरा
बानो की माँ, वो दोनों खड़ी थी, वो चूज कर रही थी कोई एम्ब्रॉयडरी. हम तो देखते, जो स्टूडेंट थे देखते रह गए. She gave a very nice smile, that was enough for us. तो हम बहुत फैशनेबल एरिया में भी रहते थे लेकिन अंदर बिल्कुल ट्रेडिशन.
You know Subhana the Worst.
Of course, Subhana the Worst तो दूर था. यहाँ नहीं था, बंड पे नहीं था वो। सुबहाना द बस उसने अपना नाम रखा था क्योंकि किसी अंग्रेज़ को या अमेरिकन को उसने काफ़ी धोखा दिया था। एक ही कालीन 3-4 कस्टमरों को प्रॉमिस किया था, कहा था मैं भेजूंगा, टेकन मनी फ्रॉम ऑल ऑफ देम एंड नॉट गिवन टू एनीवन। फिर किसी ने उसको कहा जो सुबहाना यू आर द बेस्ट, ही टुक इट एज अ कॉम्प्लीमेंट एंड ही गेव इट। से वो दूसरा था ना सफरिंग मोसेस,
यस,
पहले हाउस बोट पे होता था। तो उसको भी वो जो मोहिद्दीन साहब थे, वो बड़े, ही वाज आल्सो अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग जेंटलमैन, ही न्यू सो मच हिस्ट्री, द ओनर ऑफ द शॉप, and he had an American wife. Anyway, so some American or somebody had told him, oh, you work so hard, you are the suffering Moses. He again thought that this is a good title for his shop. I think it is still called Suffering
It is still Suffering Moses.
But it's on the bund now.
It is on the bund.
वो बंड की बात ही अलग थी। वहाँ पर बड़ा भारी एक लंबा 3 शॉप्स का शायद एक शॉप था, लिकर शॉप, S.N. Channa and Sons it used to be called. The interesting thing was all these liquor shops were owned by Kashmiri Pandits, क्योंकि उसमें जो पोलो व्यू में भी थे, ठाकर्स एजेंसी थी और कुछ था, कोई यूनिवर्सल एजेंसी। I believe they used to also stock liquor.
You have any idea about the Lambert, Mr. Lambert?
No, I remember the shop. It was a circular
Yes.
shop. Circular shop. वो था जहाँ अब बना है ना पंपोश होटल,
हाँ,
वहाँ पे था, वो केमिस्ट शॉप था।
अच्छा।
I have not seen Mr. Lambert.
No, he was in 30s, much before you were born.
But the shop was there. It was a circular shop. वो तो फिर बाद में गिरा दिया था।
Usually 5-6 जंग ओस ना, जंग इस वारिया, 99 ओस आग जंग, 68 ओस आग जंग, 27 ओस जंगी, 5-6 क्या याद छ तोय, because you are mature enough to remember things.
नहीं, I remember clearly 5-6 क्या छे। याद छो ये कि my husband was posted at Langate those days as DFO. So for the summer holidays we also had gone to Langate. तत पर गए, तत पर जाना सुंदर जाए एक चौकी पर, ततन शु तक सु रेस्ट हाउस थी वन फॉरेस्ट रेड डीच तत जाए बना. So we went there for the weekend. Not only I, but I had my nieces and my young sister-in-law. So all of us were holidaying there. So one day when they were having a bath in the river, they said that we are seeing some movements in the forest across. So everybody laughed. They said, "पता नहीं कौन है eavesdropper और देख रहे हैं कोई लड़कियों को सब नहाते हुए." We just brushed it aside. Didn't think much of it. And then of course then we came home after a couple of days. And then suddenly there was this rumor that they have caught some infiltrators. And the information about infiltrators has been given by some Gujars. They were, because the government wasn't aware at that time at all. And this was this, at this time it was Ghulam Ahmad Sadiq was the chief minister. And my brother-in-law, D.P. Dhar, was also in the government. And I think they were all. This was the Democratic National Conference, which had broken away from Bakshi Sahib after in the early 60s. No, before 60, 57 or 58. They had sort of rebelled against him and formed their own party. But now they were back in the government after that Muqaddas. When after Muqaddas, this Shamsuddin was a puppet prime minister installed by Bakshi Ghulam Ahmad, was removed because of that agitation and terrible thing, and Sadiq Sahib was made the chief minister again. So we heard, and you see those days, this D.P. Dhar's son was to be married. Vijay was to be married in 65 only. Anyway, so the rumors were there that there are some infiltrators, and then they said that they have been found to be located in Batmalu. Then Batmalu was set on fire, everything burned down. And the college was going on normally, even when the war was declared between India and Pakistan in the wake of the infiltrators' bid. But one day, some slogans were raised in SP College, Pakistan Zindabad. And somebody came to tell the principal, Mahmooda ji, that some girls are also shouting the same slogans. And instead of sitting there quietly or reporting the matter or doing anything, she was so brave that she marched to the ground where the girls were there And she located the girl who had raised the slogan. She went to her, gave her a hard slap and said, तुमको पाकिस्तान जाना है, मैं इंतज़ाम करती हूँ तुमको पाकिस्तान भेजने का. And the whole crowd was silenced. Nothing happened after that. You see, you have to think of the courage of this woman. It was not a popular thing to do, but she didn't care. This is my vivid memory of 65. And later on, when they had caught some of those infiltrators, they found a diary in which they had noted down their visit to Reddy, Chowkibal, and how they had watched some people having a bath. It was recorded in the diary of an infiltrator, whose body they found later on. And then we connected, yes, the girls were saying कि कोई हमको देख रहा है, हमने attention pay नहीं किया, ये लोग देख रहे होंगे. मगर फिर उसके बाद वॉर हुई और आपको पता है फिर ताशकंद मामला ख़त्म. और फिर हम तब तक कम से कम कॉलेज में मोज़े और टोपियाँ बना रहे थे सोल्जर्स के लिए, ऑलिव ग्रीन वूल की. The same exercise we did in 71 also. Again, Mahmooda ji was the principal. She was a committed nationalist. Ideals of Jawaharlal Nehru, and she was very close to Indira Gandhi. And Indira Gandhi came for the celebration of the college Silver Jubilee in 1975. So this college की history is interconnected with events of our Kashmir history.
ये कॉलेज में जब बटमालू तो it was part of Srinagar ना, obviously.
जल रहा था बटमालू. उससे हमें तो to tell you the truth, इस किस्म के incidents we were used to. 63 में भी देखा था, 65 में, उससे पहले 53 में भी. यहाँ पे तो हमको कंप्लीट तो पीस कभी नहीं थी ना, थोड़ा बहुत तो चलता था. अल-फतह मूवमेंट एक स्टूडेंट्स की चल रही थी, वो भी समझ नहीं आती थी कितनी वाइड स्प्रेड है या क्या है. बट apparently things were going on without a major upheaval till 89.
वो एजिटेशन भी हुआ था, वो शायद
पंडित एजिटेशन.
वो किस दौर में हुआ था?
67 में.
67 में हुआ था. वो
ये हुआ था कि वो एक लड़की काम करती थी यहाँ पर, एक सुपर बाजार था गवर्नमेंट का, उसमें उसका कोलीग था, तो उसने उससे क्वाइटली शादी कर ली. एंड दिस गर्ल एक्चुअली डिडंट हैव अ फादर. हर मदर वाज अ विडो, शी वाज द ओनली चाइल्ड, एंड शी केम फ्रॉम अ वेरी
humble background.
Quite humble background, and she was fortunate to get this job as a sales girl in this super bazaar. So then when it was discovered that she had married, the mother raised a cry. But before the mother could really raise a cry, some Pandit leadership jumped into the fray and they made it their cause. कि ये बहुत जुल्म हो रहा है, हमारी लड़कियों को ले जा रहे हैं. जैसे आजकल वो लव जहाद की बात कर रहे हैं, उस ज़माने में टर्म तो नहीं थी, लेकिन उन्होंने ये एक्सप्रेस किया फियर कि जो गरीब घरों की लड़कियां हैं वो शायद टेम्पटेशन से शादी कर लें और क्या होगा हमारा, हम तो पहले ही इतनी माइनॉरिटी हैं, कुछ नहीं होगा. तो इट वाज, आई थिंक सम अदर एलिमेंट्स आल्सो जॉइंड दिस प्रोटेस्ट एंड अ काइंड ऑफ लोकल लीडरशिप वाज थ्रोन अप. लीडरशिप में थी एक डॉक्टर थी बड़ी मशहूर उस ज़माने में, डॉक्टर जगत मोहिनी उनका नाम था. जगत मोहिनी, वो उनका हॉस्पिटल था रतन रानी हॉस्पिटल. तो उनको उन्होंने लीडर बनाया, एजुटेशन का लीडर. तो रोज़ प्रोटेस्ट होते थे, रोज़ शोर बजता था. पहली दफ़े एक हमने देखा है कि कम्युनल टाइप का एक एजुटेशन हो रहा है, इन टू विच द मुस्लिम्स हैड नो रोल एंड द पंडित्स वर डूइंग इट ऑन देयर ओन. एंड देन यू सी सम पीपल डाइड ऑल्सो कन्फ्यूजन में. 2-3 फिर बड़ी कोशिश की गई टू रेस्टोर पीस. फिर कुछ गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया के साथ भी कुछ इंटरवेंशन हुआ. उन्होंने कहा वील सेट अप अ कमीशन टू लुक इनटू द ग्रीवेंसेस ऑफ कश्मीरी पंडित्स, क्योंकि उनकी ग्रीवेंसेस उस वक्त तक ये थी ना कि अब नौकरियों में पहले तो देयर वाज नो कंपटीशन, बट आफ्टर 47 दे रियलाइज्ड, और दे शुड हैव रियलाइज्ड, that the jobs would not be so easily available to them, because now qualified Muslims were also there, and also because Muslims had been an oppressed class till then. Any government, any popular government would have to take some kind of affirmative action to raise them to the level to which they actually belonged. And so their seats in professional colleges would not be available freely to Kashmiri Pandits. So all these resentments were sort of brought together, and they in the form of an agitation. It didn't serve any purpose at all, to me, if you ask me. It only kind of created mistrust between communities.
लेकिन एक सवाल का जवाब मेरी जहन में नहीं आ रहा है. Dr. Girjadar also married a Muslim.
Of course.
It never created a fuss anywhere.
This is the business of class distinction. I have always believed it in.
यहाँ तो मैरिजेस होती रहती हैं ना, मतलब वो पहले भी होती थी.
ये क्लास की बात है. ये चूँकि ये लोअर क्लास था और ये एक कॉज बन गया इनको बाकी रिजेंटमेंट्स की वजह से. They thought it is a good enough cause. And who knows what other elements might also have contributed. But in the case of Dr. Nasir and Girja, it was a kind of an ideal marriage. They were wonderful people, and the two families had accepted each other without any protest. You see, this Parmeshwari's mother was a widow, and she had no other means of living. So she had to probably, I should say, if she had been she probably became a tool in the hands of some manipulative elements. Left to herself, she might have accepted it quietly. लेकिन ये cause बन गया, इनको बहाना मिल गया उस वक्त. And unfortunately, it did resolve itself, but it created a wedge. And
she is alive.
Ji, I know she's Parveen now.
She's Parveen.
She is actually was related to a colleague of ours at the college. And the colleague used to tell us that she is a much better Muslim than any other Muslim in their family. Because she offers namaz 5 times and she wears a burqa and everything. So anyway, she is happy. We wish her all the best. That was her choice.
तो मैम आपकी ये जो पूरी कहानी है, उस पूरी कहानी में सब कुछ गुड्डी गुड्डी हो रहा है.
हाँ, हुआ तो सही.
लेकिन एक स्टेज ऐसा भी आया जब आपको लगा बहुत चैलेंजिंग है. आपने खुद ही कहा वो 99 की कहानी है. तो क्या देखा आपने? How did you feel it?
Oh, unbelievable. I didn't think it was happening to me. सबसे पहले इंडिकेशन ये आई कि लीफलेट्स कुछ कॉलेज में फेंके गए. तो लड़कियां आई एक एक्साइटेड मेरी क्लास में, मैडम देखिए ये क्या लीफलेट है. तो क्या था उसमें लिखा हुआ कि हमारी अपनी बहनों से गुजारिश है कि वो पर्दा करें, और दूसरी गुजारिश ये है कि जो हमारी पंडित बहनें हैं वो टीका लगा के आया करें ताकि उनको कोई तकलीफ़ ना हो. तो ये मेरी क्लास में जब ये आया तो लड़कियां विल बी इंटरेस्टेड टू नो व्हाट देयर रिएक्शन वाज. वन ऑफ द गर्ल्स स्टूड अप सेड, मैडम फिर तो हम भी कल से टीका लगा के आएंगे. बट दे हैड नो आइडिया दैट द गन वाज एट द बैक ऑफ these instructions. They thought कि it is some crazy person who has sent these leaflets, because before that also there were rumors that there is a man sitting outside the college and he hits anyone who is coming without a burqa or without covering her head. But they were dismissed as just cranky behavior by some odd person or another. But then anyway, this was end of 89. We didn't think...
You are talking about Slex Maulvi?
I'm talking about?
Slex Maulvi. Slex was a fashion at kind of a... It was, I think, in...
I don't know who it is. I don't know.
There was a person who would beat girls who were...
You have also heard of it.
I have also heard, and I have studied his case.
I see.
He had a mental issue.
Mental issue.
And Professor Dr. Margoob Banhali treated him.
Dr. Margoob, the
yes,
psychiatrist.
Yes. No, the psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist.
Yes.
I see. No, but actually they just dismissed it.
It was before militancy.
Just before militancy.
Yes.
It was in 89.
Yes.
And interesting things were happening in 89. Number of Islamic study centers had also been set up in the city. And many of our staff members had become members of those. And they used to sometimes say कि बहुत material आ रहा है. फिर एक को किसी ने पूछा एक दिन, कहा अच्छा जी ये जो स्टडी सेंटर बने हैं तो मनी कहाँ से आया? तो very proudly she said बाहर से आ रहा है जी money. But nobody paid much attention to it. But these were little, indicators that things were not as they should have been. Actually, things had started becoming a little strange when this Jagmohan came as the governor in 86.
Yes.
It was popularly he was resented, but though he thought he was a good administrator and he would win over hearts and whatever. So, but what happened was that it in his tenure that again we saw a cleavage between Hindus and Muslims.
Yes.
And you probably know all those things. I don't need to go into it. So the beginning of a kind of a wedge we could see, but we didn't think it would lead to anything major. And again in 89, and another thing that had been happening is that some of the students who had sometimes visited, whose families or they themselves had visited Saudi Arabia or one of the Arab states, when they came back to college, we would see them wearing a funny kind of a headdress. But this was not taken very seriously also. But after this, all this was happening in the 89, before militancy actually came to the forefront, a kind of a message was being sent to people that they were not good enough Muslims. And there was one particular staff member whom don't want to name. She used to be like a monitor, I must say. When she came into the staff room, she would give a stern look, and then I would see many of my colleagues quickly putting on a dupatta on their head. So one day I asked one of them, I said, why do you do this? वो बेचारे सीधे कहे, ये जी फिर पीछे पड़ जाएगी. They were not doing it of their own will, but you could see that there is a kind of a movement which I now think was a movement to curb the freedom of women. But at that time it was given the, let's say, the fig leaf of religious duties. But actually it was a kind of a suppression of women, which happened with full swing in 90. When women were attacked with acid, when they were shot at, they were not wearing an abaya or a burqa. But that comes a little later. And also at that time we had a group of young women who used to go around, who had to cover themselves from head to toe. You couldn't even see their hands or fingers. And you could only see the slit of their eyes. They would go and black paint cinema posters. And these were people who called themselves Dukhtarani Millat. But they were not taken very seriously. In the college also people used to laugh and say, what are they making an exhibition of themselves? But when the 90 happened, everything changed. Because all these indications till then were now supported wholeheartedly by the gun. And then when there is a gun staring at you, you have no care but to save your life. You don't stick to your ideals, you don't stick to your beliefs or anything. If they ask you to bend, you crawl. But that's still to the credit of women, I must say. Many of them refused to cow down. In our college staff room itself, in the 90s, there were many who did not wear the abaya. And they were brave enough to say that they know Islam better than these people do. So this is what happened in 90, and then when the college opened, it didn't open in March, it opened later. And then it was all a different story.
बहुत सारी औरतों ने लड़कियों ने बुर्का पहनना शुरू किया. Did it क्योंकि you are amongst the persons who saw, rather oversaw the growth of women in public life, in careers and all that. Did the use of parda or any kind of dress code, did it impact their growth?
Of course it did. Of course it did. Suddenly they were crushed under it. I can't tell you, there was hardly any individual person left. They were all a uniform black sheet of cloth, as if there is no human soul residing inside them. And they felt so suppressed and everything. There were very few women who resisted this, and they didn't have because nobody, you see, before the gun, it's easy for you to say, oh, they should have stood by their principles. When the gun is staring at you, when your family is at risk, how can you be brave? I don't blame them. And these, you see, the Dukhtarani Millat kind of people, they had an aggressive way about them. They used to march into institutions and dictate to the principal what should be done and what should not be done. And who was to protect women? There was no one to protect them. And then when militants had the gun, no one was safe. When an attempt was made to kidnap my husband, which did not succeed, fortunately, due to the intervention of a Muslim driver and a neighbor, people couldn't. This was the first time that people showed some sympathy to the victim of militancy. Till then, they used to shun them. If a fellow was killed, he was lying there on the street for days without anybody daring to claim the body also. But in our case, it was different. I'm grateful to God for that.
You were one of the quite a few proud families who decided not to move and stay put.
That is actually, the credit should go to my husband, because he was the one who was almost kidnapped. He was the one who had had a near-death experience, because they were taken out a pistol and told him that if you don't come with us, we'll kill you now. And it was due to the intervention of our driver, personal driver Muslim, that my husband was saved, because he told the militants, so as they turned to listen to him, my husband ran, and fortunately the door of the house next door was open. He rushed in and bolted it. It was the Sardar family's house. So that miracle happened, and then we thought we didn't know what to do. Then the whole establishment here, the police department, they turned up and they said to my husband, we'll put you in a safe zone. He said that if I can't live in my own house, then I may as well leave like the others. Then they said, okay, we'll give you some little security. That wouldn't have helped, but our neighbors were supportive. They also felt a little bad that this had happened, because till then the story used to be that so-and-so was attacked because he was an agent, so-and-so was attacked because he was working in the Information or Intelligence Bureau. But they had no excuse for why my husband was attacked. So they felt that this was letting the whole movement down. And also till then they used to say that the Kashmiri Pandits who have left are giving false views about why they ran away. But here they couldn't really explain. And they realized that it was not let's say a movement against a particular person, it was a movement to threaten the minorities and make them leave. And because of the security we decided. Also, I must admit that if we had children studying here, our decision might have been different. But we were lucky in the sense that both our sons were outside studying. So he said, whatever is going to happen is going to happen to us. It doesn't matter. We have lived a full life. Let's see what happens. And also the support of my colleagues and the neighbors. We thought, both of us, my husband and I, that if we leave, it will be like letting these people down. Because I realized that all of them had suffered in one way or another. There was not a single important person who had not been threatened by militants in one way or another. In our own neighborhood, later on we realized that they used to come and demand whatever they wanted to do and hold them at gunpoint and make them do what they wanted to do.
How was your life
After this?
after this?
My life, I have to tell you the truth, in the beginning, in the 90s, many times I used to feel so suffocated. I developed a stomach ulcer also because of all the things that were happening. Either there was long hartal or there was long curfew, and then people were picked up and killed, like the Vice Chancellor, that Mushir Hassan, Kashmir University, he was taken hostage and killed. There were moments when I used to feel that I don't know why we are here. What are we trying to prove? And many times I used to tell my husband, let's go for some time. And we did go sometimes to Jammu, for a little while to Delhi. But I must tell you something interesting. So one of those occasions, I used to wear a sari all the time. It's only now because of my health that I have given it up. So I used to travel, and there used to be checking at every spot those days. In the early 90s, there wasn't just one thing near the airport, but right from Barzala onwards, there used to be checkposts, and there used to be people who would search you and all the rest of it. So one day, one person asked me, this one CRP fellow, "आप कहाँ से हैं?" मैंने कहा, मैं यहीं की हूँ. "आप हिंदू हैं?" मैंने कहा, हाँ. "तो आप यहाँ क्या कर रही?" With, as if a threatening voice, you have no business to be here. That also, you see, pushed me in the opposite direction. I said, who is he to tell me whether I should stay here or not? It should be my own choice. And because of this little token security that the government gave us, at that time, it sort of gave me courage to do what I felt like doing. I attended college regularly till the day I retired. I kept wearing my sari because my principals those days, they used to feel quite insecure because of me. They used to say, please आप भी सलवार कमीज पहने. मैं इनको कहती थी मैं पहनूंगी मगर उससे क्या साबित करूंगी. ये लोग कहे मुझे तो सब जानते हैं यहाँ पे, तो ये कहेंगे शायद ये कोई जासूसी करने के लिए रंग बदल के आ रही है. मैं जैसी हूँ तो वैसी हूँ. So I continued like that.
एक तो पढ़ाई, एक तो ज़िंदगी, लेकिन आपने बहुत काम किया लिखने पढ़ने का. आपने किताबें लिखी, बहुत सारी लिखी, और शॉर्ट स्टोरीज पे आपका तो यू वेर द एजेंसी, वन ऑफ द फ्यू पीपल who actually converted Kashmiri short stories into a language that is global.
You see, actually, I must tell you that when I was still a student doing my MA, our next door neighbor, who was also happened to be the father-in-law of my eldest sister, was one scholarly gentleman, Professor Jalal Kaul, who taught English, but he had also done a lot of work for Kashmiri literature, Lalded and all, lyrics and things. So he gave me 2 stories one day. He said, देखो तुम इनको ज़रा अंग्रेज़ी में ट्रांसलेट करो. ये जो है साहित्य अकेडमी, they are bringing out a volume of contemporary Indian short stories. So we want a Kashmiri story also to go into that, because he was in their advisory committee or something. So that is the first time when I was doing my MA that I translated these 2 stories. One was by Akhtar Mahideen called the Swargahur, the Huri of Paradise. And the other was Amin Kamil's Kokar Jung, Cockfight. And these 2 stories were published in that volume brought out by Sahitya Academy, Contemporary Indian Short Stories. So I received a sum of 100 or 150 for translation. I was very pleased with myself. But the thing is that they accepted my translation. It was published. Then I forgot all about it. But when 90 happened, when hardly any work was being done in the college, I thought, why don't I do it again? And till recently we had one person on the staff. He was a very well-known Kashmiri writer, but he taught Hindi, Hari Kishan Kaul.
Yes.
So I was familiar with his stories also, though I couldn't read. At that time I couldn't read this Nastaliq. Then I learned to read it also.
In 90 you started reading Nastaliq.
Yes. Thanks to my colleague, younger colleague in the college who is no more, Nusrat Andrabi. She was a wonderful Urdu teacher and a great person in every sense of the term. A properly liberated human being who never wore a burqa, even though she was threatened many times, and who stood by what she believed. Anyway, she used to tell me that Tochu Urdu beyanit ko to zyada janta ga. Parun kya shurta ga? मैं कहा सीखा ही नहीं. कहा मैं सिखाऊंगी. और सिखाया उसने. फिर मैंने अंडरस्टैंड करना शुरू किया कश्मीरी भी. तो then I thought कि ये सब कश्मीर में तो सब कुछ खत्म हो रहा है. Because we thought at that time everything is over and things are not going to get better. So at least let us try and save something from them. So fortunately for me, most of these authors at that time were still alive. Akhtar Mahideen, Ali Muhammad
Alone.
Amin Kamil, Bansi Nirdosh, Hari Kishan Kaul, Hriday Kaul Bharti. So I asked, a colleague helped me in tracking these people down, asked them to send me the best story they had written. I would translate it and send it back to them to see whether they thought it was all right. They all agreed that it was good. So that gave me courage. So I approached the publisher in Delhi whether he would publish. He said, we will publish these 15 stories, at least there should be 15, but we want a book on Kashmiri cooking. So can you find somebody who can do it? So I thought to myself, why don't I do it myself? करना क्या है इसमें पूछ. मेरी मदर इतनी फैंटास्टिक कुक है, उनसे पूछती हूँ रेसिपी सारी, और जो सारी डॉक्टर अली जान की बेटी है उसको जानती हूँ मैं सारे मुस्लिम कुकरी की बात, बाज़ों से भी पूछ सकती हूँ. So I wrote this Kashmiri cookery book. People wonder why I wrote it, but this is the reason basically. So they published this book of short stories which I called The Stranger Beside Me.
Yes.
Because you see, I thought it was an appropriate title to let the rest of India know what Kashmir is actually like. Because at that time we had acquired the reputation of being militants, aggressive, anti-national, whatever stuff. as if we were not human beings. So that was my one reason. And then it kept me busy, and then I thought I should actually pay some attention to the great women writers of Kashmir.
So you chose the 4.
I chose the 4 because the 2 main streams of Kashmiri poetry are mystic and lyrical romanticism. And I realized that the first writers in these 2 genres were women. Lal Ded, who set in motion the mystic strain, and Habba Khatun, who's responsible for our love lyrics and everything. So I thought it would be good, and I found 2 other ladies who belonged to the 2 streams. They were not easy to find, but I did try very hard, and through one source or another was able to acquire their works. And then I got this fellowship from this Ministry of Human Resource Development for 2 years to work on these 4 women. And that sort of gave me a deadline also. So I did it, and I'm happy, and I did it. And the best part of it is that this book was written by a woman. It's written about women. The publisher is a woman, and the people who helped me to bring this book about are all women. And I have dedicated this book to the women of Kashmir who never lost their voice.
Of the 4 characters you wrote about, which was the one that impressed you the most?
The 4 women poets?
Yes.
Well, Lal Ded, of course, towers above everyone else. And I was surprised to find that each one of them is a genius in her own right.
Yes.
Every one of them, you see, and they have a distinct way, and they have contributed something which is original and which is also undeniable. And the most important thing I find in these 2 romantic writers, Habba Khatun and Arniman, is that they are not ashamed to talk about their sexuality. They are not ashamed to express their emotions frankly. And also when they talk about the cruelty of men towards them, they are exposing the men. And they are the kind of proto-feminists, because by raising their voice against what the treatment of men towards them is, they are striking a blow on patriarchy. This was not acknowledged by anyone so far. And I thought that this is a theme which has not been explored, and it should be talked about. Fortunately, the book was received well.
Are you a feminist?
I am not a feminist in that technical sense, but I believe in the capability of women. And I believe that there is no difference between a man and woman as far as capabilities are concerned. I'm not a militant feminist, but I believe I'm an anti-patriarchy society. Anti-patriarchy. I don't want decisions to be made for women. I want women to be subjects, not objects. Because that's the way I have lived my life. I have not allowed my decisions to be influenced by any dominance of a man. I have been so far able to convince the men in my life of the choices that I have made, and I don't regret doing that.
What was the most important decision that you made in your life?
To stick to my job, not to give up my job.
And what do you regret?
Regret? Let me think, what do I regret? I really don't have any regrets. Oh no, what can I regret? I don't regret my marriage, I don't regret the way I lived my life. Regret to I'm sorry, I can't find anything. I don't regret not leaving Kashmir. I don't regret staying on in Kashmir. What else can I regret? No. Regret kya kar sakte?
You're very fortunate.
I think so. I do believe that I am fortunate. But I think a kind of inherent courage has something to do with your being fortunate or not fortunate.
Are you still reading, studying, writing?
Of course, how can I survive without reading? But I don't read, I listen. But fortunately for me, everything is available on Audible. And I am a great novel reader, and I still continue to be so. I read detective fiction, I read serious novels, I read a lot of funny stuff. One of my favorite authors is P.G. Wodehouse, to whom I return very often when I'm in a bit of a gloomy mood. I quickly find something on my phone audible material from B.G. Woodhouse, and I laugh for a little while and I'm fine.
What is the last book that you read about Kashmir?
About Kashmir?
Yes.
Oh, I recently read a book which is written by a young woman about Kashmir. It's called, I think it's called Lol or something.
Yes.
Behak Jamal. Behak Jamal has written this book. I enjoyed thoroughly because you see, I couldn't read it myself, but I had somebody with me who read out many of those stories. I found it was an honest account of what life in Kashmir is from 90s onwards. How people have steered their course, how they have navigated, how they have retained their humanity in spite of everything. I enjoyed it thoroughly. But the most recent novel I finished was a thing called The Dictionary of Lost Words. It is written about the making of the Oxford English Dictionary in Oxford. And it has the important participant is a woman who helps them to find words which are only used by women. So I like the idea, and it's a lovely story. It's just finished reading it. By Pip Williams. If somebody is interested, they can read.
Why is there something very special to Kashmir that Angrezi comes naturally to people?
I think so. Yeah, but the first teachers who came here were missionaries. I think that has something to do with it. And women's education also, the convent, and then the missionary schools, the Bisco School, Burnhall School, who had Irish or British or Australian teachers. It has something to do with it, and also the fact that we are a tourist place. We are familiar with English people, foreigners. We are at ease with them, and for communication skills, we are even a houseboat, or not only a houseboat owner, but even a boatman knows a few words of English. And the Kashmiris are actually this. I think the Kashmiris had always a sense of a little bit of inferiority, which was instilled in them because of foreign rulers, and therefore they are very keen to learn. They don't think that they know everything. They are keen to learn, and they learn, and they are receptive, and basically we are an intelligent race, I must say. And also we see that even people from Jammu, their pronunciation is not quite always there. In spite of being educated, there are certain things which they can't manage. But I haven't seen that flaw in educated Kashmiris. Must be something to do with their genes, I don't know.
It was a very interesting conversation. It was a knowledge conversation. It was a revisit to the days gone by. तो बहुत पुरानी कहानी है, बहुत लंबी कहानी है. So, but ये जो इंसान की सेल्फ डिस्कवरी होती है, ये बड़ी इम्पोर्टेंट है, अपने लिए भी, दूसरों के लिए भी. एंड होप जब आपकी नई किताब आ जाएगी तो उसको हम बहाना बनाएंगे एक बार फिर बात करने के लिए, आपकी यादों को खरीदने के लिए. Till then, so nice of you. Inshallah. Thank you, and so nice of you.
Thank you
for sparing so much of time.
I'm glad I did this time with you because it helped me to remember many good things, which is a kind of a rejuvenating experience for me also.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so nice.
All the best.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And long life.